would like to talk about something that shapes all of us in one way or another, yet often operates beneath the surface of our awareness, and that is the institution of motherhood. This is about real lives and the daily experiences of people doing mother work, people I know and work with, my neighbors, my friends, many of you. We'll be looking at how social, economic, technological, medical systems influence the work of mothering and how they often limit autonomy, dignity, and choice. And we're also going to discuss toward the end how we might envision something more free and more just and more humane. I'm taking this quote as my starting point because it really speaks to the construction that mothering, motherhood, mother work, the mother experience didn't appear out of thin air, that there are real social foundations that created and are upholding this. So the socially constructed myth of the natural mother thus makes everything even more difficult. My central argument is that the institution of motherhood as it exists within patriarchy, capitalism, medicalization, nationalism, systemically oppress those who can give birth or those who take on mother work on both physical and psychological levels. We'll look at how these forces intertwine from the medicalization of birth to economic pressures that make parenting a real financial strain and impossibility, as well as to the emotional and mental load of cultural expectations that mothers should be endlessly selfless and are blamed when things fall short. We'll start by building a solid theoretical foundation using matricentric feminism and the reproductive justice frameworks, which expand our understanding of feminism generally to include a mother-centered perspective, as well as including understandings of race and class and other systemic inequalities. And then we'll look at 3 specific examples of how this shows up in the day-to-day experiences of mothers. We'll specifically look at female sexual dysfunction, the medicalization of pregnancy and labor and birth, and then the maternal mental health crisis. These are all manifestations of the same systems. And we'll end with some reflections about how mothering can be really, truly, and how mothering is really, truly empowering and a liberatory experience. So let's lay that groundwork. Matricentric feminism basically says if feminism generally keeps ignoring mothers, it's missing a huge part of the oppression of women. Instead of treating motherhood issues as a side topic, it starts with mothers' lives and asks, what would feminism look like if we took mothering seriously? Matricentric feminism treats mother and mother work as its own category, not just a subcategory of woman, right? Because some problems are specifically about being a mother, specifically about being a parent or a caregiver or doing mother work. One example being the fact that of young adults under 35 years old, the wage gap between women who are and are not mothers is larger than the wage gap between young men and women generally. So in this view, mothers are oppressed both as women in a sexist society, as well as mothers, oppressed as mothers inside a really specific, demanding institution of motherhood. And one of the things that I appreciate most about matricentric feminism is that it also really pushes back on the idea that mothering is like natural instinct. And it really treats mothering as real work, real joyful work, but work that's skilled and that's shaped by practice and history and social structures, and not something that people who give birth are just like magically knowing how to do. And that means that the goal isn't to get women to be better at self sacrifice, but it's really to challenge the institution of motherhood itself and imagine forms of mothering that are empowering rather than erasing. It's about social change and recognizing that raising children is essential labor for society and should never be dumped solely on individual mothers or women, either as a job description or as the core of their identity. Before we go further, I'd like us to think about this word that I've been throwing around that we all know well, and that is motherhood. What does it mean? What comes to mind when you hear motherhood? In this presentation, when I'm talking about motherhood, I'm talking about an institution. It's a system, and it's designed. It's designed specifically within patriarchy and nationalism to control and define women's reproductive lives. It's not just about having children. It's about being placed inside a framework that dictates what kind of mother a woman is supposed to be and who is and is not able to achieve that image. This institution of motherhood tells women that their highest value lies in self-sacrifice. It insists that a good mother is endlessly giving and puts everyone else first. It tells her she should rely on experts to know her child, even though this role should come naturally to her, and that her worth is tied to nurturing others, but never caring or being creative for herself. Historically, the system has confined women's creativity and potential, and even safety. It's denied material support like childcare, fair pay, basic human needs like rest. And it punishes women who don't or can't live up to its impossible standards. So everyone. And we see that its modern version most clearly in this thing that we call intensive mothering, which is very strictly child-centered, expert-guided, emotionally consuming, and very expensive. Now contrast that with mothering. Mothering is not a system, it's a practice. It's the lived, personal, and deeply relational act of caring for a child and how that shapes individual and family and community identities. And really importantly, it's defined by those who do it, not by the institutional rules that tell us how we should be doing it. Some scholars have discussed how mothering can become a source of power when it's removed from its institutional binding. And mothering, one of the things that we're focusing on here is that mothering is intellectual work, and it's emotional work, and it's moral work. It's the daily practice that that's responding to real human needs. And in doing so, it can become a site of transformation, both personally and communally. It can become a site of social change and working for justice. Some feminist theorists like Adrienne Rich and later scholars in matricentric feminism invite us to imagine what would happen if society valued mothering as much as it idealizes motherhood? What if we allowed care, connection, creativity, joy, pleasure into the way we think about mothers and mother work? And I want to mention here that when I talk about liberating parents, I'm not rejecting mothers. I'm not rejecting the practice of raising children. What I really would like to be doing here is challenging its institutional form, motherhood under patriarchy, under white nationalism. I'm really asking here, how do we pick apart this ideology so that those who do mother work can define it and live it on their own terms? Or, as Alexis Gums wonders, what if mothering is about the how of it? Motherhood is a status granted to white middle-class women. Mothering is another matter, a possible action, the name for that nurturing work, that survival dance. And that's from Alexis Gums' Mother Ourselves. And then reproductive justice is another essential framework for looking at this, and it has 3 essential tenets. And those are the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to parent one's children in safe and supportive environments. One of the sort of really revolutionary aspects of reproductive justice is that it expands beyond conversations of choice to address systemic inequities that are shaped by race and class and gender and ability, and all of the intersections of the ways that we identify and are identified. And we'll talk more about this in a later slide. But for now, we'll say that matricentric feminism and reproductive justice challenge how patriarchal, capitalist, and medical institutions limit parents' self-determination and commodify reproduction. Reproductive justice emphasizes race and class more than early matricentric feminist works. And that means that reproductive justice situates maternal oppression within larger structures of racialized and economic control, and actually really bridges middle class and marginalized maternal experiences. Loretta Ross and Ricky Solinger co-authored the book Reproductive Justice: An Introduction, with the goal of really spelling out the ways in which reproduction isn't just sperm meets egg and uterus does its contraction thing equals baby, but that it's really fundamentally a social and cultural and overall contextual process involving economics and political power and surveillance of reproductive bodies, including self-surveillance, especially in the context of this pressure to be an informed patient and the internalization of truly impossible expectations, as well as the fear of state oversight and judgment. We're going to move into a discussion of those 3 examples of how this all plays out in the lives of women. And these are just 3 examples. They are nowhere near all of them. And really, like, anyone who's involved in birthing and raising children may well experience these things at some point. So first up is female sexual dysfunction and gendered expectations. The medicalization of female sexual dysfunction exemplifies how structural gender oppression is both obscured and internalized. Female sexual dysfunction is primarily promoted by the pharmaceutical industry, as a physiological problem that requires treatment of the individual person, the individual body, really in a classic case of disease mongering, right? That fails to acknowledge that there are social and economic and relational contexts of women's lives. The struggle can be seen through the lens of the mother caregiver role, which means that individual women's identities are often overtaken by the relentless pressure to provide selflessness and service both to children and their partners. This is sometimes referred to as the maternal second shift. And it causes chronic stress. There's a blurring of partner and mother roles. It's exhausting, and all of these things can contribute to low desire. Also, sometimes women might engage in duty sex or feel like they are unable to refuse sex because of their lower social power in the relationship. And the study that I'm specifically referencing here was specifically examining the experiences of heterosexual women partnered with men, mostly in a white middle class context. I do think it's important to note that BIPOC and poor working class mothers don't always experience the same gender division of labor due to the fact that stay-at-home motherhood has never really been a possibility or an ideal in those communities. But regardless of who we're talking about, I just really want to emphasize that sexual difficulties like low desire can be more accurately understood as sociocultural experiences rather than individual or private failings. And don't lose sight of the fact that under the institution of motherhood, women are stereotyped as nurturant caregivers, leading to this inequitable division of labor and dictating that women's value is tied to their ability to play certain sexual scripts, which leads to objectification, as well as self-monitoring and feelings of shame and guilt. And all of this makes experiencing genuine desire and pleasure incredibly difficult, if not outright impossible. And that's why framing sexual difficulties as collective issues and shifting the focus from fixing the individual person to challenging the problematic social structures is really important. And I'll just read this quote here, that low sexual desire in women partnered with men has been treated as a problem or pathology located within women's bodies and reflecting biomedical or psychological causes that require individual treatment. The actual research belies these assumptions and shows how they are often without theoretical or empirical basis, and rarely reflect the testing or even exploring of alternatives. Now we're going to shift to something even more overtly commodified, and that is childbirth itself. In a capitalist system, the decision to have a child becomes a financial decision, if it's an option at all. Class, race, ability, and other identity locations all impact whether a person will have the financial resources to confidently choose parenthood, whether environmental or political violence will take away the choice of whether or not and when to become pregnant, as well as the conditions under which a pregnant person labors and births their baby. I have this quote here from this New York Times article. It's really unfortunate, but I love it for how well it exemplifies the issue that we're talking about here. And it says, when she became pregnant, Miss Martin called her local hospital, inquiring about the price of maternity care. The finance office at first said it did not know, and then gave her a range of $4,000 to $45,000. It was unreal, Miss Martin said. I was like, how could you not know this? You're a hospital. It turns out that the United States, But in the United States, birthing a baby costs approximately $30,000 to $50,000. I still second guess myself every time I see these numbers, like maybe I had a typo. It really truly is unreal. And think about that for a moment. Like, the childbirth is one of the most fundamental human experiences. Not the most, but it's definitely up there. It's one of them. It's keeping us going. But certainly, it's become one of the most expensive medical experiences a person can have in the US. And these are not prices that reflect better care or better outcomes. The US has the highest spending on maternity care of any developed nation, and yet we have some of the worst maternal and infant mortality rates. This is capitalism at work. Pregnancy and birth are no longer understood as cultural or biological life cycle events. Pregnancy and birth have become markets. There are profits to be made from prenatal care, from monitoring, from interventions, from medications, from surgery, and increasingly, too, from the artificial polarization of natural versus medical birth. Many birthing parents in the US have experienced their pregnant body as an inconvenient barrier to easy access for medical interventions. And that really reinforces this patriarchal structure of modern obstetrics, where doctors manage the labor for efficiency and predictability and control. This reflects a system that incentivizes overtreatment, right? I'm not talking about medicine. I'm not critiquing medicine for the times when it really truly is useful and helpful and life-saving and improves the quality of life. But we are in a system that incentivizes overtreatment in order to maximize profit. And that has harmful consequences for actual health. And this is all while devaluing pregnant people's physical and intellectual and emotional labor and intelligence and capabilities, again, in the name of profit and convenience and efficiency and predictability, which are all things that benefit the doctor and not necessarily the pregnant person or their baby or their family or community. Which leaves us wondering, like, what exactly are we paying for? I love these little guys here. Like, yeah, what are we paying for? Someone explain this. The World Health Organization tracks maternal mortality by measuring the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. For example, for every 100,000 live babies born in Norway each year, one birthing parent dies. In France, there is 7 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. In the UK, 8. In Canada, 12, and you can probably see where I'm going with this. 17. In the United States, maternal deaths happen at more than twice the rate of most other industrialized countries. We have the highest among high-income nations. We know that these deaths are not evenly divided, with Black and Indigenous mothers experiencing astronomical disparate outcomes, and with outcomes being worse for poor mothers than for wealthy ones. And yet, even middle-class white women in America have unconscionably high maternal death rates compared with other high-income countries. Which brings us to a conversation about choice, because choice is often framed as the heart of reproductive freedom. But in practice, it operates inside really constraining environments. Who actually gets to choose is shaped by money, by race, by policy, with ideology. People with economic and racial privilege can access a wider menu of options like fertility treatments, like high quality prenatal care, childbirth education, more access to abortion care, child care, even surrogates or paid help around the house. So their decisions line up more neatly with the cultural ideal of the informed, responsible mother. For many others, for most of us, choice is much thinner if it exists at all. Economic stress, lack of insurance, clinic closures, policies like the Hyde Amendment mean that some people, many people, are pushed into abortions they don't want, while others are forced to continue pregnancies they can't afford or which are otherwise unwished for at that time. Financial pressure leads some people to delay important health care or to use contraception less effectively. Not because that's what they want, but because that's what they can pay for. Reproductive justice pushes us to name this honestly. What looks like individual preference is often structured by inequality. Liberal ideas about informed consent assume that decisions are freely made and therefore fully owned by the individual. But these perceptions really struggle to account for choices that are made under coercive conditions, like poverty, like racism, like lack of services, like lack of safe services. And at the same time, parents with more privilege are told that being a good mother means constantly researching, monitoring, performing the best choices, turning informed choice into a form of self-surveillance. In hospitals, choices around birth are typically narrowed by medical paternalism and fetal-centered policies. In politics, we see access to contraception and abortion repeatedly overridden by ideological agendas, not by agendas that are prioritizing the health of people and families and communities. So rather than treating choice as a neutral, level playing field, what I'm really hoping here is to ask us to see how choice often functions as an illusion, and sometimes as a tool of institutional control, unless choice grounded in real material support and access and autonomy. If the choice is not grounded in these things, then it is an illusion. The intensive mother ideology creates enormous psychological pressure. It sets impossible standards and then blames mothers when they can't meet them. In this section, we're going to explore how patriarchal ideals, state control, and the psychology of oppression intersect to create mental health crises for mothers, and how these crises are then pathologized instead of recognized as rational responses to oppressive conditions. The myth of the natural mother says, mothering skills come naturally. A mother will be loving, calm, fulfilled by caring for her children all day, every day. Overnight shifts mandatory, no holidays. Also, real motherhood is instinctive, and yet a mother must listen to the experts. And immense love and joy and connection and feelings of genuine empowerment can and should be part of the mothering experience. And also, here are some other things that all mothers feel at least some of the time. Ambivalence, anger, frustration, boredom, the desire to be somewhere else, the experience of their own needs conflicting with the needs of others or of the task at hand, not knowing who they are anymore, not sure what to do next or how to handle a given situation. These are not failures of mothering. These are not mothers being or failing at what they're doing. These are normal human experiences, and we wouldn't bat an eye at them if we heard them from someone else, like, say, a father or a college student. But the myth doesn't allow for them in the lives of mothers. When a mother feels frustrated with their children, they often feel shame. When they're angry, they feel like a bad parent. When they resent the loss of other parts of their life, they feel guilty. The split between the image and the reality is psychologically damaging. It prevents mothers from getting support. It prevents them from honest connections with other mothers, and it isolates them, especially isolating in feelings of shame and guilt. Many caregivers experience high rates of depression and anxiety. I want to highlight an article that specifically focused on low-income mothers. It's noteworthy because the parents in this study often don't see their depression as an illness. They see it as a rational response to their circumstances. These parents live in poverty. Many of them experience domestic violence. They may be caring for a child with serious behavioral or developmental challenges. They may face racism, immigration-related stress, housing and food insecurity, lack of adequate employment, or any employment at all. Really, the list goes on. And one mother in this study said, "Walk in my shoes for 1 week. You'll be depressed too." And she was right. If you're living in poverty, in these circumstances and no social support, you are very likely depressed as well. Much like female sexual dysfunction, maternal mental health issues are by and large not individual pathologies. It's a sane response to insane conditions. But the mental health system wants to pathologize this. It wants to treat parents' depression with medication or therapy. It wants to individualize a fundamentally social problem. The psychology and pharmaceutical industries aren't asking what would it take to change the conditions that are causing this depression. They're asking, how do we help these people accept and function within these oppressive conditions? For parents of color and poor parents and disabled parents, especially, seeking psychological help not only risks missing the point, it could potentially threaten the family. Seeking help often means disclosing our struggles to professionals who are working within the dominant ideologies that are oppressing, and which would uphold the ideology of motherhood. Some of those professionals have the power to decide whether or not a particular mother is a good mother. They can potentially remove her children from her care. And while sometimes it is beneficial for there to be a degree of separation while family members are focusing on individual healing, the threat of revoking a parent's right to mother their children is state control operating through fear. The threat of child removal is sometimes used as a tool to keep mothers compliant and from seeking help or to keep them isolated. I've been really grateful to see the rise in maternal mental health awareness campaigns, especially since the pandemic. Several organizations are challenging the dominant narratives of individual pathology and bad mothering at global and national and local levels. I'm really particularly excited about the rise of peer support, both in group and one-on-one mentorship settings, because peer support can help parents understand that they're not the only ones struggling. It can facilitate knowledge sharing and empowerment to challenge dominant narratives. that are imposed on their lives. And it can help connect each other to safe professional support when needed. As I hope I've made clear, mother work should not be done in isolation or without adequate resources, although most of us are experiencing both. Well Mama and Baby Blues Connection both serve parents in Oregon with reproductive mental health and peer support services. Well Mama also has dedicated resource lists for BIPOC and LGBTQ plus and rural parents, as well as resources in Spanish. What all of this shows us is that motherhood, as we know it, is not some natural, timeless role. It's an institution that has been carefully built and maintained at the intersection of patriarchy, capitalism, and nationalism, and in the US specifically within white nationalism. It tells mothers that they should be selfless and self-sacrificing. It blames them when systems fail, and it especially targets marginalized mothers through racist and nationalist and capitalist policies. From forced sterilization to neglect in our current maternal health system. At the same time, capitalism treats parents' labor as cheap and disposable, while turning children and birth into expensive commodities, so that a majority of women now say very plainly, I cannot afford to have a baby right now. I don't want a baby. I cannot afford a baby. And if they do become pregnant, they are often forced to carry the pregnancy to term and to parent the baby. And of course, the most powerful opponents of abortion rights tend to also be the most active in eroding welfare and social supports for families with young children. All of this results in long-term consequences to a family's health, to their economic security, to their dignity. In that context, as we talked about, choice around reproduction is often more of an illusion than a reality. So if this isn't just about individual choices or better self-care, what does liberation look like? What does this better way look like? Matricentric feminism tells us that we have to start by centering mothers as mothers, not as an afterthought or outright excluded identity in the scope of women's issues. And reproductive justice reminds us that this has to be explicitly intersectional and structural because race and class and ability and immigration status and more shape who gets to parent in relative safety and dignity and who does not. Together, matricentric feminism and reproductive justice invite us to imagine mothering as something that can and is genuinely empowering. A practice that honors the full personhood of parents instead of demanding their constant sacrifice or objectifiedness. That means fighting for adequate wages, housing, access to real culturally relevant foods, for freedom from surveillance and punishment for failing to meet the standards of an impossible ideology. It also means challenging our cultural stories about who a good mother is and what they do. If we can name the institution of motherhood as an oppressive system, we can also start to remake it into something that sustains mothers instead of consuming them. So some questions for consideration are, where do you see the difference between motherhood as an institution and mothering as a lived practice showing up? And how does that distinction shift what feels possible for mothers in your own life and work and community? Also, in what ways have you witnessed choice around reproduction, birth, or parenting function more as an illusion or tool of control than genuine autonomy? If collective care, material support, and autonomy were truly centered in your specific context, what concrete changes in policy or healthcare, workplaces, or families, for example, would need to happen to move toward maternal liberation? Maternal love is real. The connection between caregiver and child is profound. And right now, all of that is happening within a system designed to extract, control, and erase pregnant people, mothers, and caregivers more generally. Our work, the work of reproductive justice, of matricentric feminism, is to imagine and build a world where mothers can experience motherhood freely, where their needs matter, where they have autonomy and support and recognition, where their labor is valued, where the bond with their children is not used as a tool of control, but as a source of personal and communal power. Thank you.